Julian sensed it before he understood it. That was always the order with him. He felt imbalance long before he could name it. He noticed shifts in tone, gaps in rhythm, moments where the world no longer responded to him the way it used to. He didn't yet know what had changed. Only that something had. It showed up first in his questions. Not the direct ones. Julian avoided those unless he felt cornered. These were softer, exploratory questions, designed to test the edges of my awareness without exposing his own. "What are you working on lately?" he asked one evening as we cleared the table. "Planning," I said. "For work?" "For everything." The answer unsettled him. I saw it in the way he stacked the plates too carefully, aligning them even though they didn't need alignment. He nodded. "That's good. Planning is responsible." Responsible was one of his approval words. I didn't respond. Julian began lingering more. In doorways. In hallways. In moments that used to pass quickly. He'd pause as if deciding whether to say something else, then choose not to. He watched my face more carefully when I spoke, searching for reactions that never came. The absence of reaction confused him. Julian understood anger. He knew how to respond to tears. He had scripts for confrontation. What he didn't know how to handle was calm without compliance. One night, he suggested we revisit old conversations. Not a specific one. Just the idea of them. About us, he said, sitting across from me on the couch. Just to make sure we're aligned. Aligned again. I met his gaze evenly. "We can talk whenever you want." The ease of my response disarmed him. He had been preparing for resistance or reassurance. He received neither. The conversation never happened. Instead, Julian shifted tactics. He became attentive in a way that felt rehearsed. He asked how my day was and listened a little longer than usual. He sent messages during the day, nothing emotional, just check-ins. He brought home small things he knew I liked, framed as spontaneous gestures. "You crossed my mind," he said once, handing me a pastry from a bakery I loved. The gesture might have softened me months ago. Now, I noticed the timing. This wasn't affection. It was reinforcement. Julian also began talking about the future more frequently. Not emotionally. Strategically. Next year, he'd say. Long term. Eventually. He framed everything as shared, collaborative, secure. It was an attempt to reassert continuity. He needed to believe the structure was intact. The following afternoon, Marissa messaged me again. I spoke to him today. I read the message twice before responding. How did it go? There was a pause. Something felt off. That made sense. Julian could feel pressure without understanding its source. When that happened, he tightened control. He reinforced the narrative that benefited him most. Off how? I asked. Like he was distracted. Like he was waiting for something. I understood that feeling well. Julian was waiting for reassurance from both sides. I replied carefully. That happens when someone is trying to manage too many stories at once. She didn't respond right away. When she did, the message was shorter. I don't think he's being honest with either of us. I believed that. But honesty was no longer the point. I didn't reply. Silence does more work than explanation ever could. That evening, Julian came home earlier than expected. He moved through the apartment as if checking something invisible. His eyes lingered on details he'd ignored for years: the bookshelf, the dining table, the framed photos in the hallway. "You okay?" I asked. "Yes," he said quickly. Then, after a pause, "Just tired." Tired again. The word still worked, but not as well as it used to. We sat together on the couch, the television murmuring in the background. Julian rested his arm along the back cushion, close but not touching. When he finally spoke, his tone was careful. "I've been thinking about simplifying things," he said. "Reducing complications." I turned toward him. "What kind of complications?" He hesitated. "Too many moving parts." That was the closest he'd come to the truth. "I agree," I said. "Clarity matters." He studied my face, searching for something he couldn't name. Later, in bed, Julian asked a question he hadn't asked in years. "Do you trust me?" The words were quiet, almost tentative. "Yes," I replied. The answer was true in the narrowest sense. I trusted him to behave exactly as he always had. He exhaled slowly, relieved. The next morning, I met with Martha again. Not to plan exposure. To confirm timing. She reviewed the notes I'd brought, then closed the folder. "He's positioning himself," she said. "Which means he's close to making a move." That's what I thought. "Once he moves," she continued, "you won't need to do anything dramatic. You'll only need to respond." Response, not reaction. That had become my mantra. That afternoon, Julian texted me. "I need to talk tonight." I replied a few minutes later. "Okay." The word landed heavier now. Julian no longer trusted it. He came home tense, the confidence from earlier weeks replaced by something more brittle. He poured a drink but didn't sit down right away. "I've been under a lot of pressure," he said. "I think some things need to change." I nodded. Change can be useful. He finally looked at me then. "You're being very calm about this." "I've had time to think," I said. "About what?" "About what matters." The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Julian broke it first. "There are things I haven't told you," he said. That was new. I waited. He hesitated, then shook his head. "We'll talk later." Later again. I watched him retreat into himself, unsettled by the realization that the narrative no longer belonged to him alone. That night, after he fell asleep, my phone buzzed. A message from Marissa. "I don't think I can keep doing this." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I replied with the truth. "That's a decision only you can make." A minute passed. Then another message appeared. "I think he's about to make one too." I set the phone down and turned off the light. Julian slept beside me, unaware that every option he believed was available to him was narrowing. He thought the next move was his. By morning, he would discover it wasn't. Julian chose the timing carefully. That was his instinct when he felt power slipping: select a moment that felt neutral, reasonable, difficult to challenge. No raised voices. No witnesses. No sudden exits. Control thrives in quiet. "I need to talk," he said again that evening, standing near the window with his phone loosely in his hand. I nodded. Okay. He hadn't expected the ease of it. I could see that immediately. Julian had prepared himself for resistance or reassurance, not permission. He cleared his throat. I've been thinking a lot, he began. About where we are. About what makes sense going forward. I waited. Julian continued when I didn't interrupt. We've both been under a lot of pressure, he said. And I think we've reached a point where things need to shift. Shift. Not end. Not break. Shift sounded manageable. I don't want this to be emotional, he added quickly. I want it to be practical. Practical was Julian's shield. I leaned back slightly, attentive but unmoved. Go on. That unsettled him again. He hadn't expected calm interest. He'd been bracing for confrontation. I care about you, he said. That hasn't changed. He paused, watching my face. It didn't. But I don't think we're aligned anymore. Aligned. There it was again, the word he used when he wanted to absolve himself of responsibility. Aligned how? I asked. Julian took a breath, visibly choosing his phrasing. Our lives, he said. Our priorities. The way we move through things. He gestured vaguely, as if alignment were a logistical problem rather than an emotional one. I think we've grown apart, he added. Naturally. Naturally. As if distance simply occurred, without effort or choice. I nodded once. That can happen. He relaxed, encouraged. I don't want this to feel like failure, he said. I want it to feel clean. Clean. The word landed with quiet weight. Clean meant efficient. Controlled. Minimal fallout. Julian wasn't asking whether we should end things. He was telling me how he wanted it to happen. He sat down across from me, resting his elbows on his knees. I've been reviewing our arrangements, he said. The prenup. The logistics. There it was. The structure beneath the sentiment. I think we can handle this in a way that's fair, he continued. Respectful. Respectful was what Julian called anything that protected his image. I don't want lawyers to make this messy, he said. We can decide things ourselves. I looked at him steadily. Decide what? He hesitated. Then, how we separate. The word sat between us. Separate. Not divorce. Separate sounded temporary. Civil, rational. You've thought this through, I said. Yes, he replied immediately. That answer came too quickly. I want to make this easy on both of us, he added. We don't need conflict. Conflict would cost him. I nodded slowly. And what does easy look like to you? Julian smiled faintly, relieved to be back on ground he believed he understood. I keep my business interests intact, he said. You keep your independence. We divide things cleanly. Divide things. That phrase carried more weight than he realized. And Marissa? I asked. The name landed like a dropped glass. Julian froze. He hadn't expected that. Not yet. I don't know what you mean, he said carefully. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply repeated it. And Marissa? The silence stretched. Julian's eyes searched my face for anger, for accusation, for proof that I was bluffing. He found none. How do you know that name? He asked finally. Because you stopped hiding it, I replied. He sat back slowly, recalculating. This isn't what you think, he said. Then explain it, I replied. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, Julian didn't have a script ready. I didn't intend for things to happen this way, he said after a moment. That was the closest thing to admission he'd offered. I didn't plan for this, he added quickly. It just evolved. Evolved. As if choices were weather patterns. And you thought managing it quietly would protect everyone? I asked. He hesitated. Yes. There it was. The truth, stripped of justification. You protected yourself, I said calmly. Julian frowned. That's not fair. I'm not judging, I replied. I'm observing. Observation was harder to argue with. He tried a different approach. I don't want to hurt you, he said. I want us both to move on with dignity. Dignity. Another carefully chosen word. I believe you, I said. That surprised him. You do? Yes, I replied. You want this to be dignified. On your terms. He flinched slightly. I think we can avoid unnecessary complications, he said. We don't need to involve attorneys. There are already attorneys involved, I said quietly. Julian stared at me. What do you mean? I mean I'm prepared, I replied. Prepared. That word changed the room. Julian stood abruptly and paced once, then stopped. You went behind my back, he said. No, I replied. I caught up. That distinction mattered. Julian ran a hand through his hair, frustration breaking through his composure. I wanted this to be simple, he said. You wanted this to be controlled, I replied. The silence that followed was heavier than anything spoken. Finally, Julian exhaled. Then what do you want? He asked. I met his eyes. I want clarity, I said. And I want sequence. Sequence? He repeated. Yes, I replied. You move. I respond. Julian stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. That's not how this works, he said. It is now. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fine, he said. I'll send you the documents tomorrow. Documents. Plural. He still believed paper would protect him. Do that, I replied. Julian picked up his jacket, then paused at the door. I never wanted to hurt you, he said. I believed him. But wanting and doing are not the same thing. That night, he slept in the guest room. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, not shaken, just alert. Because Julian thought the conversation had gone well. He believed he had framed the ending. He believed I would react emotionally later. He believed I would negotiate. He believed he was still in control. He was wrong. At midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from Marissa. He told me he's ending things with you. I stared at the screen. Then typed. Be careful. A pause. Then. He says it will be clean. I closed my eyes briefly. Clean. Always clean. I replied with one final message. Clean for him doesn't mean safe for you. I set the phone down and turned off the light. Julian thought he had chosen the ending. He didn't realize he'd only chosen the moment everything else became inevitable. Julian brought the documents home on a Tuesday. That wasn't accidental. Tuesday had become his day for controlled encounters. Lunches. Meetings. Conversations he believed he could manage without disruption. He liked symmetry. He liked things to line up neatly. He arrived earlier than usual, a slim leather folder tucked under his arm like a badge of preparation. "I thought we could go through these together," he said, setting the folder on the dining table. I looked at it, then at him. "Now?" "If you have time," he replied. "I don't want this to drag on." Drag on. The phrase carried impatience beneath its calm. "I have time," I said. Julian nodded, relieved. He sat across from me, posture straight, hands folded, every inch of him projecting reasonableness. This was the version of himself he liked most, the composed man making difficult but necessary decisions. "I want this to be straightforward," he began. "No surprises." I almost smiled. "No surprises," I repeated. "Yes," he said. "We both know how messy these things can get if emotions take over." I didn't interrupt. Julian opened the folder and slid the first document toward me. "Just preliminary," he said. "Frameworks. We can adjust." Frameworks. Another word he used to soften intention. I skimmed the page slowly, not because I needed to read it carefully, but because I wanted to see how he reacted to my silence. He filled it. "This just outlines asset separation," he said. "Nothing drastic. Mostly aligns with the prenup." Mostly. That word mattered. I looked up. "Mostly?" He smiled faintly. "Some clarifications." Clarifications that favored him. I nodded and returned to the document. Julian leaned back slightly, confidence growing. He believed this was working. He believed my calm meant agreement, or at least resignation. He was wrong. What Julian didn't understand was that I had already read these structures before. Not these exact pages, but their intent. Martha had prepared me for this moment. "Let him talk," she had said. "Let him explain." People reveal everything when they justify. Julian revealed a great deal. "This simplifies shared accounts," he continued, pointing to a section. "It reduces friction during the transition." Transition. Not separation. Not divorce. Transition suggested movement without rupture. "And here," he said, tapping another page, "we outline temporary arrangements. Living situations. Expenses. Temporary arrangements that assumed his timeline. And this," he added, almost casually, "addresses disclosure. Just to confirm neither of us is withholding anything relevant." Disclosure. The word hung in the air. I met his eyes. "Anything relevant?" "Yes," he said quickly. "Financially relevant. Third-party obligations." Third-party obligations. He had avoided saying her name again. "Interesting." I nodded. "I'll want my attorney to review this." Julian's expression tightened just slightly. "I thought we agreed to handle this ourselves." "I agreed to review," I replied. "Not to finalize." He exhaled slowly. "Involving lawyers escalates things." "No," I said calmly. "It clarifies them." He didn't like that answer. Julian tried another approach. "I don't want this to become adversarial," he said. "We've been good partners." Partners. The word felt transactional now. "We have," I agreed. "And I want us to leave this with respect," he continued. "For each other. For ourselves. Respect, in Julian's language, meant minimal exposure. I closed the folder gently. I have a question, I said. He nodded. Of course. When did you plan to tell Marissa you were still married? The question landed cleanly. No accusation. No raised voice. Julian froze. Just for a second. Then his face rearranged itself. She knows, he said. Now, I replied. When did you plan to tell her originally? He didn't answer immediately. That's not relevant, he said finally. It is, I replied. Because it speaks to disclosure. The very word he just used. Julian leaned back, jaw tight. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. I'm making it accurate, I replied. Accuracy was dangerous to him. Julian stood and walked to the window, staring out as if the city might offer support. I didn't expect this to turn into an interrogation, he said. I didn't interrogate you, I replied. I asked a question. He turned back to me. You're angry, he said. No, I replied. I'm precise. Precision unsettled him. He preferred emotion. Emotion was predictable. Precision required him to choose words carefully. He returned to the table and softened his tone. Look, he said. I don't want anyone hurt unnecessarily. Marissa included. There it was. The first time he'd said her name without prompting. I nodded. Then be honest. I am being honest, he said. Then tell her the full truth, I replied. And tell me what she knows. Julian hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any confession could. Later that evening, after Julian retreated to the guest room with his documents, my phone buzzed. A message from Marissa. He says you're being difficult. I stared at the screen. Then typed. Difficult how? Her response came quickly. About paperwork. About timing. Timing. Everything was about timing now. I replied calmly. What did he tell you about me? There was a pause. Then. That you're practical. That you understand this needs to be handled carefully. I almost laughed. Julian had repackaged my calm into compliance again. I typed back. Be careful what you agree to. Ask questions. A moment later. He says lawyers aren't necessary. That confirmed it. I replied. That usually benefits the person saying it. The next few days unfolded with quiet pressure. Julian checked in more often, gauging my mood. He brought up the documents twice more, framing urgency as efficiency. We don't want this hanging over us, he said. I responded the same way each time. My attorney is reviewing. That sentence changed everything. Julian stopped smiling. On Friday evening, he came home tense. We need to talk, he said. I nodded. Okay. He didn't sit down this time. I spoke to Marissa, he said. She's uncomfortable. With what? I asked. With the situation, he replied. With waiting. Waiting. The word tasted ironic. And? I asked. And I think we need to accelerate this. Accelerate. Julian was trying to outrun consequences. I folded my hands. Accelerate how? He hesitated. Finalize things. So we can all move forward. All. The inclusion was unintentional. I looked at him steadily. You want to finalize before everything is disclosed. His eyes narrowed. I want to minimize damage. To whom? I asked. He didn't answer. That night, I spoke to Martha again. Not emotionally. Strategically. He's pushing, I said. Good, she replied. That means he's exposed. Next steps. Let him, she said. Every move he makes now is documented. Saturday morning, Julian packed a bag. Just a couple of nights, he said. To give us space. Space again. I nodded. That's fine. He hesitated at the door. This isn't personal, he said. I met his eyes. It never is. For you. He left without another word. That afternoon, Marissa messaged again. He says he's staying with a friend. I replied. Is he? There was a pause. Then. No. That single word changed everything. Julian had begun lying more freely. Not because he was careless. Because he was cornered. By Sunday evening, I knew the shape of what was coming. Julian would attempt to finalize separation quickly. He would frame urgency as kindness. He would avoid full disclosure. He would rely on the prenup to shield him. What he didn't realize was that his behavior now, documented, consistent, escalating, was doing the opposite. He wasn't negotiating. He was triggering. When Julian returned Sunday night, he looked tired. Not physically. Strategically. We should finish this, he said. Yes, I replied. We should. He exhaled, relieved. He thought agreement meant surrender. He didn't realize it meant readiness. That night, as he slept in the guest room, my phone buzzed one final time. A message from Marissa. I don't think he's told me everything. I replied with honesty. Neither of us thought he had. I set the phone down and turned off the light. Julian believed negotiation was still possible. He believed paper would save him. He believed he could choose the ending. But negotiation requires balance. And balance had already shifted. Julian believed the hardest part was over. That belief was the gift he gave himself, the assumption that once words were spoken and papers were placed on the table, momentum would carry everything forward. People like Julian rely on momentum. It replaces resistance with inevitability. It turns objection into inconvenience. It makes silence feel like agreement. By the time Monday arrived, Julian had convinced himself that we were already halfway to the ending he wanted. He just didn't know what ending he was actually heading toward. He returned home that morning with a practiced calm. Not relaxed. Composed. The difference mattered. I spoke to my attorney, he said over coffee, as if that alone made the day official. Nothing dramatic. Just confirming process. Process. Julian loved that word. What process? I asked. He smiled faintly. Separation. Timeline. Implementation. Implementation. Another word that assumed consent. I'll need to review anything formal, I said. Of course, he replied quickly. I expected that. But his tone suggested he expected it to be brief. Julian had always been good at choosing the version of truth that sounded reasonable. This was no different. He didn't lie outright. He curated. He removed context. He arranged facts in an order that made his decisions look inevitable rather than intentional. That morning, he began explaining. "I think we've both known for a while that this wasn't sustainable," he said. "We've been living parallel lives." Parallel lives. A phrase that erased responsibility. "I don't think either of us failed," he continued. "We just evolved differently." Evolved. As if choices had happened to him. I listened without interrupting. Julian needed to hear himself speak. He needed the narrative to land. "And I want to handle this respectfully," he added. Discreetly. Discreetly. That word wasn't for me. It was for everyone else. "What are you telling Marissa?" I asked. The question stopped him mid-sentence. He hadn't expected it again. "That we're separating," he said carefully. "Already?" "Yes." He didn't look at me when he said it. "Before anything is finalized?" I asked. He shrugged. I wanted to be honest. That was not honesty. That was positioning. "You told her before telling me the full terms," I said. Julian frowned. "I told you what matters." "What matters to whom?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "You're making this adversarial," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm making it accurate." Accuracy had become my quiet weapon. That afternoon, the documents arrived. Not physically. Digitally. Julian believed digital delivery softened impact. It made things feel procedural rather than personal. I opened the files calmly. There were revisions. Small ones. Reallocations framed as efficiencies. Disclosures framed as confirmations rather than revelations. Timelines tightened without explanation. Julian had adjusted the framework in his favor. Not drastically. Just enough to tilt. I forwarded everything to Martha without comment. Then I waited. Julian didn't wait well. By evening, he was restless. "Did you get the files?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "What do you think?" "I'm reviewing." "With your attorney?" "Yes." His discomfort was visible now. "I don't want this to drag out," he said. "Neither do I," I replied. But we meant different things. That night, Marissa messaged me again. "He says we'll be able to move forward soon." I stared at the sentence. Forward. Julian had already sold her an ending. I replied carefully. "What did he say about timing?" Her response came quickly. "Soon." He didn't give specifics. Of course he didn't. Specifics create accountability. I typed back. "If he hasn't finalized anything, be cautious." There was a pause. Then, "I feel like I'm waiting for permission." That sentence mattered. Julian wasn't just managing two narratives. He was keeping both of us suspended. I replied, "That's not a place you should stay." The next morning, Julian tried again. "I don't want lawyers to turn this into something it doesn't need to be," he said over breakfast. "We've been civil." "We still are," I replied. "Then let's keep it that way." Civil. Julian's favorite word for compliance. "I will," I said. "As long as the process is balanced." He stared at me. Balanced how? I met his eyes. Full disclosure. Accurate timelines. No assumptions. Julian leaned back, irritation breaking through. You're acting like I've done something wrong, he said. I'm acting like I'm paying attention, I replied. The room went quiet. By midweek, Julian's confidence began to fracture. Not publicly. Privately. He double-checked messages. He reread emails. He hesitated before speaking. Control requires certainty. Certainty was slipping. On Wednesday evening, he finally asked the question he'd been avoiding. Are you planning to fight this? I didn't answer immediately. I'm planning to respond appropriately, I said. That doesn't answer the question. It does, I replied. You're just not sure how. Martha called me Thursday morning. He's crossed a line, she said. What kind? Disclosure, she replied. Or rather, lack of it. She explained calmly. Julian had moved funds between accounts, not illegally, but strategically. Enough to suggest intent. Enough to trigger review. He thought he was consolidating, she said. He was actually documenting behavior. I closed my eyes briefly. Not in relief. In confirmation. What happens next? I asked. Now, Martha said, we slow everything down. Slow. The opposite of what Julian wanted. That evening, Julian came home visibly strained. We need to talk, he said. I nodded. Okay. He paced once before stopping. My attorney says things are getting complicated, he said. That wasn't the plan. Plans rarely survive scrutiny. I told you I wanted this clean, he added. You wanted this controlled, I replied. He exhaled sharply. Why are you doing this? The question surprised him as much as me. I answered honestly. Because you assumed I wouldn't. He stared at me. What does that mean? It means you planned for me to be emotional, I said. Or cooperative. Or tired. And you're not? He asked. No, I replied. I'm present. That word unsettled him. That night, Marissa sent one final message. He's frustrated. He says you're dragging this out. I replied with restraint. I'm following process. A pause. Then. He said you're trying to punish him. I typed slowly. Accountability feels like punishment when you're not used to it. There was no response after that. Julian didn't sleep well that night. Neither did I. But for different reasons. He was losing momentum. I was gaining clarity. On Friday morning, Julian received an email that changed his posture. Not a threat. Not a demand. A request. For documentation. For clarification. For disclosure. He read it twice. Then a third time. Then he looked at me. We didn't need this, he said. I met his gaze. You needed it, I replied. You just didn't know yet. Julian believed he had chosen the version of the truth that would protect him. He hadn't realized that choosing a version meant excluding others. And excluded truths have a way of returning. Not dramatically. Inevitably. By the end of the day, Julian knew something important. The ending was no longer his to script. He could still speak. He could still explain. But the structure, legal, emotional, factual, was already shifting around him. And he didn't yet understand how far. That understanding would come later. Much later. Julian had always believed that control was something you could reassert if you acted quickly enough. If one approach failed, you adjusted the angle. If resistance appeared, you reframed. If consequences surfaced, you negotiated. What Julian didn't understand, what he had never needed to understand before, was that control only works when everyone involved agrees to play the same game. And I had stopped playing. The email from Martha arrived on a Monday morning. Julian saw it first. Not because it was addressed to him, but because it changed the way I moved through the kitchen. He noticed how I didn't rush. How I finished my coffee before responding. How I didn't immediately pick up my phone again. "You heard back," he said. "Yes," I replied. He waited. "What did she say?" he asked. "That she needs more documentation." Julian's jaw tightened. "About what?" "About timelines," I said. "About disclosure." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, irritation barely contained. "I've already disclosed everything relevant," he said. "That's not what she thinks," I replied. Julian exhaled sharply. "Of course not. Of course not." The phrase carried frustration, but also disbelief. He wasn't angry yet. He was confused. He didn't understand why his version of events wasn't being accepted at face value. That was new. By midweek, Julian was no longer trying to sound calm. He was still polite. Still careful. But the effort was visible now, like someone holding a door closed with too much force. "This doesn't need to be complicated," he said one evening, pacing the living room. "We both know what's happening." "Do we?" I asked. He stopped pacing. "We're separating." "Yes," I agreed. "We are. And the prenup is clear," he added. "There are terms." "There are," I said. "And there are triggers." That word stopped him. "Triggers?" "Yes," I replied. "Conditions. Timelines. Conduct." Julian frowned. "You're reading too much into it." "No," I said. "I'm reading it accurately." Accuracy again. It followed him everywhere now. Julian had underestimated something fundamental. He believed that preparation belonged to him. He believed that because he had initiated the separation, he would control the structure of it. That initiative equaled authority. What he hadn't accounted for was response. Response doesn't announce itself. It doesn't threaten. It simply moves when the moment allows. On Thursday afternoon, Julian came home early. Not with documents. With a question. "Did you talk to Marissa?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "When?" "Recently." His eyes narrowed. "About what?" "About what she understands," I replied. "And what she doesn't." Julian's expression shifted. "You shouldn't have involved her," he said. "I didn't involve her," I replied. "She reached out." That detail mattered. Julian stared at me, realization beginning to form. "She contacted you?" he asked. "Yes." "When?" "After you told her you were separating." Julian turned away. For the first time, I saw something like panic. Not fear of exposure. Fear of loss of narrative. That evening, Marissa messaged me again. "He's upset." I didn't respond immediately. A few minutes later, he says you're trying to sabotage things. That word, sabotage, revealed more than Julian realized. Sabotage implies intention. Sabotage implies conflict. I replied calmly. I'm responding to what's happening. There was a pause. Then, he says you're refusing to let things be simple. I closed my eyes briefly. Simple. Always simple. I typed back. Simple for him isn't the same as fair for everyone. The typing indicator appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally. I don't think he's been honest with me. There it was. The sentence Julian had been trying to avoid. I replied with care. That's something you'll need to decide for yourself. Julian didn't sleep well that night. He got up twice. Checked his phone. Stood by the window longer than necessary. In the morning, he was clipped, efficient, distant. I'll be late, he said. I know, I replied. That unsettled him. The real shift happened Friday afternoon. Julian came home early again, holding his phone like it weighed more than usual. My attorney wants to meet, he said. That's reasonable, I replied. He says there are concerns. About what? About timing, Julian said. About overlap. Overlap. The word sat between us like a crack. Overlap with what? I asked. Julian didn't answer immediately. Then, personal matters. I nodded. That's what disclosure is for. His voice rose slightly. I didn't do anything illegal. No one said you did, I replied. But you're treating me like someone whose actions have consequences, I finished. He stared at me. You're punishing me, he said. No, I replied. I'm not protecting you. The difference mattered. That night, Julian packed another bag. Longer this time. I'll stay elsewhere for a bit, he said. While things cool down. Okay, I replied. He hesitated at the door. This isn't how I wanted it to go, he said. It rarely is, I replied. He left without another word. The apartment felt quieter after that. Not emptier. Clearer. I didn't miss him the way I expected to. I missed the version of him I'd believed in. But that version had already left. Saturday morning, Martha called. He's requesting mediation, she said. That was fast, I replied. He's trying to regain control, she said. That usually means he's losing it. What's your recommendation? Proceed, she said. But slowly. Slowly. The word felt right. That afternoon, Marissa sent one last message. He told me you're trying to hurt him. I stared at it for a long moment. Then typed. I'm trying to protect myself. The reply came almost immediately. I think he lied to me. I didn't correct her. I didn't confirm it either. People need to arrive at truth on their own. By Sunday evening, Julian had left behind more than just belongings. He had left behind assumptions. Assumptions about how this would unfold. Assumptions about who would react and who would respond. Assumptions about who needed who more. Julian believed the exit would be clean. What he didn't understand was this. Clean exits require honesty. And honesty was the one thing he had tried to manage instead of practice. The week ended quietly. No shouting. No confrontation. No spectacle. Just process. And in process, momentum shifts. Not suddenly. Irreversibly. Mediation was Julian's idea. That detail mattered. Julian had always believed in neutral rooms. Controlled environments. Spaces where emotion could be framed as excess and logic could be presented as authority. Mediation, to him, was the perfect setting, quiet, private, respectable. A place where he could sound reasonable. A place where he believed I would soften. The conference room was small and intentionally plain. Neutral colors. No windows that invited distraction. A long table that placed everyone at equal distance, as if proximity itself could create fairness. Julian arrived early. He always did when he wanted to establish presence. By the time I entered with Martha, he was already seated, posture composed, hands folded neatly in front of him. He looked calm. Prepared. Almost relieved. This, he believed, was the beginning of resolution. The mediator introduced herself, explained the process, emphasized neutrality. Her voice was measured, practiced. She spoke about cooperation, respect, mutual understanding. Julian nodded at all the right moments. I listened. The process began with opening statements. Julian went first. I want this to be civil, he said. I don't believe in unnecessary conflict. Conflict again. I think we've simply grown apart, he continued. There's no villain here. Villain. Interesting choice of word. He spoke about shared history. About respect. About the desire to move forward cleanly. Cleanly. Every sentence was shaped to sound balanced. Reasonable. Regretful without being responsible. When he finished, the mediator turned to me. I didn't rush. I want clarity, I said. And I want accuracy. Julian's eyes flicked toward me. I'm not interested in reinterpreting the past, I continued. I'm interested in addressing what's actually happened. The mediator nodded, encouragingly. Julian shifted in his seat. The discussion moved to logistics. Assets. Accounts. Property. Julian spoke confidently, referencing numbers, timelines, arrangements he believed were settled. Then Martha spoke. Not emotionally. Factually. She asked about transfers Julian hadn't mentioned. About timing inconsistencies. About overlapping representations. Julian frowned. Those are administrative details. They're material, Martha replied calmly. Material. That word landed differently in a legal setting. The mediator paused. Mr. Hale, she said, can you clarify these points? Julian hesitated. Just slightly. Then he answered. And in answering, he began contradicting himself. Not dramatically. Incrementally. One date didn't align. One explanation required adjustment. One omission required justification. Each correction seemed harmless on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. Julian grew quieter. Not defensive. Cautious. He chose his words more carefully now, weighing each sentence as if it might carry more weight than intended. The mediator noticed. So, she said gently, there appears to be some discrepancy between stated timelines and documented actions. Julian's jaw tightened. I wasn't trying to mislead anyone, he said quickly. No one said you were, the mediator replied. But the implication lingered. When the topic shifted to conduct, Julian's posture changed again. This was the part he had underestimated. Martha didn't accuse. She asked questions. When did you inform Ms. Hale of the relationship? When did that relationship begin? What disclosures were made, and when? Julian answered. Then corrected himself. Then reframed. By the third question, it was clear he had been managing information, not sharing it. The mediator glanced between us. I'm going to recommend a pause, she said. There are some issues here that need clarification before we proceed. Julian stared at the table. For the first time, he wasn't in control of the pace. The break was brief. Julian stood near the coffee station, phone in hand, not using it. He looked like someone waiting for a signal that wasn't coming. I stood with Martha near the window. You see it? She asked quietly. Yes, I replied. His story only works when no one asks follow-up questions, she said. That's always been true, I replied. When mediation resumed, the tone had shifted. Still polite, but no longer indulgent. The mediator outlined next steps, additional documentation, verified disclosures, independent review. Julian nodded stiffly. This wasn't what he'd planned. I thought we were here to resolve things, he said. We are, the mediator replied. Resolution requires clarity. Clarity again. The word had changed sides. That evening, Julian didn't come home. He texted instead. Need space. This got complicated. Complicated. The word followed him everywhere now. I replied. Take the time you need. He didn't respond. Marissa messaged me later that night. He didn't tell me about mediation. I stared at the message. Then typed. What did he tell you? That everything was almost settled. Of course he had. I replied carefully. Settled means different things to different people. There was a long pause. Then, I don't think I know who he really is. That sentence carried weight. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was late. People don't say that until the illusion has cracked. The following week was quiet. Not peaceful. Suspended. Julian communicated only through his attorney. His tone shifted from confidence to caution. Requests replaced declarations. Questions replaced assumptions. The system was doing what it was designed to do. And Julian hated systems he didn't control. One afternoon, he called me directly. I don't recognize you, he said. I almost smiled. You do, I replied. You just didn't expect me to stay present. Silence. I wanted this to be respectful, he said. It still is, I replied. It's just not convenient. That ended the call. By the end of the week, one thing was clear. Julian's version of events no longer traveled well. Not with lawyers. Not with mediators. Not with Marissa. It required silence to survive. And silence was gone. What Julian hadn't realized was that losing control of the story wasn't the end. It was the beginning of accountability. Not public. Not explosive. Institutional. And institutions don't care how charming you are. They care how consistent you've been. As I sat alone in the apartment that night, reviewing notes and timelines, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not relief. Alignment. With myself. Because for the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting to Julian's moves. I was watching them land. The unraveling didn't announce itself. There were no headlines. No dramatic confrontations. No scenes that could be replayed and dissected by strangers. Instead, it arrived the way real consequences often do, quietly, through changed behavior. Through pauses. Through people asking different questions than they used to. The first sign came at a dinner I almost didn't attend. It was a small gathering, the kind Julian and I had hosted dozens of times before. Colleagues. Friends. People who moved easily between professional and personal spaces, where reputations mattered but weren't openly discussed. Julian wasn't there. That alone was notable. He couldn't make it, I said when someone asked. I didn't elaborate. No one pressed. But something shifted in the room anyway. People lingered near me longer than usual. Conversations slowed when Julian's name came up, then redirected themselves smoothly, like drivers avoiding a pothole. No one asked how he was doing. They asked how I was. That difference mattered. A friend I hadn't spoken to in months pulled me aside near the kitchen. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Why?" She hesitated. "You just seem steady." I smiled faintly. "I am." She nodded, as if that answered something she hadn't said aloud. People sense when something has changed before they know what it is. They adjust instinctively. The following week, Julian's name came up at work. Not in a meeting. In a hallway. I was walking past two colleagues when I heard it, softened, uncertain. "I thought he'd be here today," one of them said. "He's unavailable," the other replied. Unavailable. Not busy. Not traveling. Unavailable. The word carried weight. I didn't stop walking. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The shift had already happened. Julian noticed it too. He just didn't know what to do about it. He called me one evening, unexpectedly. "They're acting differently," he said without preamble. "Who?" I asked. "Everyone," he replied. "At work. At events. Even clients." I waited. "They're cautious," he continued. "Like they're waiting for something." That was exactly right. "They're paying attention," I said. He exhaled sharply. "This isn't fair." Fairness again. The word sounded hollow now. "You wanted discretion," I replied. "This is what discretion looks like." Silence. He hung up shortly after. Martha called me the next day. "He's struggling," she said. "With what?" "With credibility," she replied. "Not legally, yet. Socially." That distinction mattered. Legal consequences come with procedures. Social consequences come with perception. And perception doesn't require proof, only consistency. Julian's attorney requested additional meetings. Julian requested more time. The mediator requested more documentation. Everyone wanted something from Julian now. That was new. He had built his life around being the one who asked, not the one who explained. Marissa reached out again. Not with questions this time. With distance. "I need to step back," she wrote. "I don't think this is what I thought it was." I didn't reply immediately. Then, I don't want to be part of something that feels unclear. Unclear. Julian's favorite word had turned against him. I responded with restraint. Take care of yourself. That was all. By the end of the week, Julian's absence had become noticeable. Not dramatic. Noticeable. He wasn't at the usual events. He didn't appear in the places where his presence had once been automatic. People filled the space around him carefully. They didn't ask why. They didn't need to. The first time someone asked me directly, it surprised me. Are you and Julian okay? A colleague asked over coffee. Yes, I said calmly. We're in process. That answer traveled. Not because it revealed anything. Because it confirmed something people already sensed. Process suggests complexity. Complexity suggests truth. Julian tried to reclaim ground. He attended a networking event alone, stayed longer than necessary, spoke louder than usual. He made jokes that didn't land. He told stories that once would have charmed the room. This time, people listened politely. Then they drifted. Charm requires trust. Trust had thinned. He confronted me about it later. You're letting people assume things, he said. No, I replied. I'm letting them observe. You could clarify, he pressed. Clarify what? I asked. He didn't answer. Because clarity would require honesty. And honesty would require consistency. The final shift came quietly. A board Julian had hoped to join postponed his consideration. No explanation. Just a delay. Delays don't sound like punishment. They are worse. They invite scrutiny. Julian stared at the email as if it might change. It didn't. That night, he sent me a message. This is affecting my life. I read it carefully before responding. This is your life, I typed. It always was. He didn't reply. What Julian never understood was that reputation isn't destroyed. It's adjusted. People don't suddenly decide you're untrustworthy. They decide you're unpredictable. And unpredictability is the one thing institutions and relationships avoid at all costs. As the week ended, I felt something settle. Not victory. Not closure. Momentum. The kind that doesn't need force. The kind that moves because gravity has shifted. Julian had wanted discretion. He had gotten it. Just not in the way he imagined.